Okay, so I have come to understand that anytime you run across a 50-50 person, you should run screaming to the hills. And it's not because 50-50 isn't fair, it's because the kind of person who's obsessed with the 50-50 is the kind of person who already is resource guarding, is expecting someone to come and take advantage of them, and is hyper fixating on who's contributing what to what percentage. And then also, the contributions are weighted more toward their contributions and not towards, like, let's say the victim's contributions. So often in a dynamic, victims will be having like these conversations with someone and they seem reason. You're like, oh, okay. Yeah, that seems reasonable. Oh, sure, we can 50-50. That makes sense. Sure. Uh, but the fact that this person is so closely paying attention, so closely criticizing who's doing what and to what amount, et cetera, already means that regardless of whether or not the structure itself is theoretically fair, the person who wants it is a person who is not fair. It's not going to be safe to do it with. So victims of abuse get sort of ideologically pushed into doing things that they don't necessarily wouldn't intrinsically want to do, and but they're convinced essentially over time by this person, standing on morality or fairness or whatever it is. But the problem is that when you are a hypercritical person, the fairness isn't always accurate. And also, just like a person exists in time, relationships exist in time and there are seasons. There are seasons sometimes where everyone can't contribute equally exactly in the same ways. And this really shows up when you have something like children are born, where you literally how now everyone should be involved. Everyone should be engaged in childcare and taking care of the home to the best of their ability. But honestly, if you physically did the labor, you literally may not I mean, you've been through a medical event. You can't 50-50 often, especially if you're like breastfeeding, getting up in the middle of the night to do like the night feedings and things like that. It may be asymmetrical for a period of time. Or let's say someone's injured and they're in the hospital and you can't 50-50 your way out of that. So anyone who has that 50-50 orientation and like pledges allegiance to it, if you don't do it, you're a bad person, and doesn't have at least some flexibility around circumstances, is going to be a very, very rigid kind of person who is not going to be weighting your contributions, the victim's contributions, as much as they weight their own. And that's the other thing too. When you run into, honestly, it even happens in society. So like in capitalism, let's say, or in a family dynamic, when you hyper specialize and you now have people, for efficiency's sake, or, in this, for capitalism, like maybe for profit's sake, you have people hyper specializing so that the whole system as a whole can expand more than it is. Um, Usually you then have the people not recognizing each other's labor, not recognizing the level of work everyone is doing. That's why I always recommend like everyone should be to their ability should be contributing, taking care of the home that they all share. Like I don't care if you make 5,000% times the money of this other person, because if you are not engaged in the taking care of the home, then to you it's going to be invisible labor. It's not real. It doesn't really take much work. Why are you complaining? Not only is this your job, but it's easy. Same thing happens with childcare. I don't want to do the childcare. That's your job to do, but also it's not really real work anyway. So my contributions are more. So you're in this relationship dynamic with this 50-50 person who kind of got you to agree to it based off fairness, except they're the judge. They're the arbiter. They decide what labor is worth what percentage of the 50-50. So regardless of whether or not it seems like a fair system, the person who wants it the most is usually the least fair. And so when when we look at a person who's bringing us like an idea of like, oh, we should do this. This is all of these reasons make it fair. So we should do this in our relationship, or we should this is how we should go out as a friend group and handle like the money. Um, why are you making such a big deal of this? It's not that serious. It's not that deep. They simultaneously want what you do. They want you to continue doing it. They want what you give. They benefit from it, but they're also going to act like you aren't contributing as much as they are, and that it actually really isn't even that much work or that much that you're contributing in the first place. And in fact, honestly, it's to your benefit that you get to do XYZ. Do you see what I mean? So, anyway, when we're dealing with people, we want to, yes, they're the words that are coming out of their mouths and they're the ideas that they're saying. But also behind the words and the ideas is the way they think and approach the world. And you are going to be in for a rough time if you're in a dynamic with a person who is paranoid, who is hyper vigilant, who is hypercritical, who doesn't have grace towards others but only toward themselves. That's you're gonna end up going in an abusive direction, most likely. Because you're gonna end up arguing on, well, what is fair, and your labor have value, and the less someone does the labor, the less they're gonna value it. And this comes up for me personally when I'm raising my son, he already looks like a man. He's like, I think he's 6'2" now. He's 13. And I was just like, listen, I need you to understand. Yes, you are stronger, but that does not mean you are better. And it doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want to at people. When I was stronger than you, I didn't do that. I expect the same courtesy toward me. But also, we all work toward taking care of the home. Everybody's responsible for contributing in whatever ways they can. And obviously, if someone's injured or ill, you wait that. But there's a lot of victims who sit there and are still doing childcare and cleaning the home and cooking for people while they're incapacitated, whereas the other person never gets that luxury. So even then, there's still, the labor never seems to end. When he was little, we do how little kids, they always love to, what do you like, this or this, or what's your favorite, whatever. And so he'd ask me what my favorite food was. And I would tell him, like, bro, it's food I don't have to make. My favorite food is whatever another person elects to make for me and share with me. And I think that's delicious. To me, that is the best food. And I was like, oh no, mom, is it like sushi? Is it this? Is it that? I was like, I don't think you understand. Like, I know how much labor cooking is. I know how much work it is to put together menus. I know how much work it is to consider everybody's taste and palate and to do like a rotating menu and then like all the cleanup afterward. And there's a lot of work involved in cooking. So to me, anybody who's willing to do any of that and share it with me, that's delicious. That's the most delicious food I could ever have. And it was really interesting because he got older and he goes, oh yeah. He's like, I understand. Because now he's getting to a point where I'm like, well, you should make your own food. Like, that's a skill that you need to have. You need to be able to go in the kitchen and put yourself together a little meal, a little snack, a little something. As much as I love to be nurturing like that, you have to become an adult, and part of becoming an adult is practicing adult things. And so one of those things is taking care of your own space, or figuring out like your own food. And so he said to me, he goes, Mom, he's like, but the best food is the food you don't have to make. And I was like, okay, well, A plus gold star on persuasion and argumentation. I love it. And I actually did go ahead and make the food for him because I was like, that's, as a debate person, I was like amazed and thrilled at that particular line of argumentation. But like in general, buddy, also let's consider that because it's work, we do it also. And anyway, so when you're dealing with people, just be careful. Just be careful. when they're sitting there looking and going, well, who's doing the most work? Because the work, when you're not doing it and when it doesn't happen when you're around, is invisible labor. Because, oh, everything just stays clean. Well, if it just stayed clean, there'd be cobwebs. Or like if you didn't really have to clean, there'd be cobwebs. You track stuff in on the floor. Like the fact that you don't feel anything on the floor when you're walking around barefoot is an indication that some cleaning has occurred. But if you're not a person who normally cleans, you're not going to know this stuff. And that is why everyone should participate in the life of the home, the work of the home. And again, it doesn't have to be 50-50, but we all need to be working together on the place that we live together. Because also, you're more like, if you're not, and you do not value that labor, you're more likely to go through and make messes and not clean up after yourself. Whereas when you know, A, I might have to clean it, or B, I know how much work it is to clean, you're not going to do that unless you're an absolute inconsiderate, selfish D-bag. So anyway, hope this makes sense, and I'll talk to you next time.